It's 5:47 a.m. in Tallinn, Estonia. In exactly 60 hours, this city will fall to Russian forces, and NATO won't be able to stop it. This isn't speculation. This is the conclusion of multiple Pentagon war games. The Baltic states could be overrun before the West even mobilizes. The question isn't if Russia could conquer the Baltics, it's how fast, and the answer will terrify you. Welcome to the most dangerous corridor in Europe, where World War III could start in the next 72 hours. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, three tiny nations, 7.5 million people, standing between Russia and total NATO humiliation. Here's what makes this terrifying. Russia has run this exact scenario in military exercises, over and over. They've practiced this invasion for years. The plan starts here. Kaliningrad, Russia's heavily militarized exclave wedged between Poland and Lithuania, armed with nuclear-capable Iskander missiles. To the east, Belarus, completely under Russian control, hosting thousands of Russian troops just miles from NATO borders. And sandwiched between them, the Suwalki Gap, 65 miles of Polish-Lithuanian border, the only land connection between the Baltics and NATO. Rand Corporation ran the simulations 7 times. NATO lost every single time. Russian forces reached Tallinn and Riga in under 60 hours. So how does Russia actually do it? It starts weeks before with something you won't even notice: cyber attacks. Baltic power grids flicker. Internet slows down. Nothing alarming yet, just technical difficulties. But it's Russia mapping every system, every weakness. Then the hybrid warfare begins. Russian-speaking minorities in Estonia and Latvia suddenly face persecution. Moscow demands protection of Russian citizens. State media goes into overdrive. Fabricated incidents, doctored videos, building the pretext for humanitarian intervention. The playbook from Crimea and Donbass. Meanwhile, unmarked military convoys appear in Belarus. Just routine exercises, Moscow claims. NATO watches nervously but doesn't want to escalate over drills. Hour 0. It's 3 a.m. across the Baltics. Most people are asleep. That's when the cyber attacks go from probing to destructive. Power stations shut down. Communications networks crash. GPS signals jam. Air traffic control goes dark. The Baltics are digitally decapitated in minutes. Simultaneously, Russian special forces already embedded in the region activate. Spetsnaz teams sabotage key bridges, communication towers, and military depots. At 3:15 a.m., the first missiles launch. Kaliningrad unleashes Iskander strikes on Baltic air bases, destroying aircraft before they can scramble. Estonian and Latvian air defenses never stood a chance. Russia's electronic warfare blankets the region. NATO radars see nothing but static. By 4 a.m., Russian tanks cross the border, not just from one direction, from everywhere. Belarus, Kaliningrad, Russia proper, a coordinated blitzkrieg. The main thrust aims for the Suwalki Gap. Armored columns race to cut Lithuania off from Poland. Sever the corridor, isolate the Baltics. Russian VDV paratroopers drop on strategic locations, airports, highway junctions, power stations, small teams causing maximum chaos behind enemy lines. Baltic defense forces fight back hard. Estonian and Lithuanian troops are well-trained and motivated, but they're facing 10-to-1 odds. NATO's problem isn't willpower, it's geography and math. The nearest substantial NATO forces are in Poland and Germany, hours away at minimum. Article 5 is invoked immediately. NATO's collective defense clause activates, but activation and actual military response are very different things. Here's the brutal reality. Moving a modern armored brigade takes days, not hours. Logistics, fuel, ammunition, coordination. War isn't a video game. By hour 12, Russian forces are halfway to Tallinn. Estonian resistance is fierce, but they're being overwhelmed by sheer numbers and firepower. The Suwalki Gap falls by hour 18. Russian and Belarusian forces link up. The Baltic states are now physically cut off from NATO reinforcements. Polish forces try to fight through the gap, but Russian artillery and air power create a killing zone. Every attempt to break through fails. Latvia's capital Riga comes under assault by hour 24. Russian forces advance from multiple directions. The city is encircled within hours. NATO air power finally arrives, but Russia's integrated air defense is formidable. S-400 systems in Kaliningrad create no-fly zones stretching hundreds of miles. American F-35s score kills but can't operate freely. For every Russian aircraft shot down, NATO loses precious planes it can't quickly replace in theater. By hour 36, the situation is desperate. Half of Estonia is under Russian control. Riga is surrounded. Vilnius is under direct assault. The nuclear question emerges. Does NATO use tactical nuclear weapons to stop the invasion? Does that trigger Russian nuclear response? Nobody wants to find out. European NATO members are paralyzed. Germany, France, and others call for negotiations. The alliance is fracturing under pressure in real time. American reinforcements are still crossing the Atlantic. The 82nd Airborne is deploying, but won't arrive in strength for another 48 hours minimum. Russian supply lines start to stretch. This is their vulnerability. The invasion is moving so fast that logistics struggle to keep up. But it doesn't matter. By hour 48, Russian forces reach the outskirts of Tallinn. The Estonian capital is within artillery range. Baltic governments evacuate to secret locations. Presidents broadcast defiant messages, but the reality is clear. Their nations are being overrun. Civilians flee westward. Highways jam with refugees. Families abandon everything, desperate to reach Poland before Russian forces cut off escape routes. Hour 60 arrives. Russian tanks roll through the outskirts of Tallinn. The invasion that NATO said couldn't happen has succeeded in 2.5 days. The Kremlin doesn't need to occupy every village. Control the capitals, major cities, and infrastructure. Present NATO with a fait accompli. Now NATO faces an impossible choice. Launch a massive counteroffensive to liberate occupied territory, risking continental war, or accept the new reality. A counteroffensive means urban warfare in Baltic cities, civilian casualties in the hundreds of thousands, destruction of the very nations NATO is trying to save. And Russia still holds the nuclear card. Putin's calculus is simple. NATO won't risk London, Paris, and New York for Tallinn, Riga, and Vilnius. This is the nightmare scenario Pentagon planners lose sleep over. Not whether Russia could invade, but what happens after they succeed. The post-invasion options are all terrible. Accept Russian occupation and watch NATO credibility collapse. Or fight a war that could go nuclear. So how do we prevent this? The answer is already happening. Enhanced forward presence, permanent NATO troops stationed in the Baltics. Not huge numbers, but enough that Russia can't invade without killing American, British, German, and French soldiers immediately, making Article 5 automatic and undeniable. The Suwalki Gap is being fortified. Poland and Lithuania are building permanent defenses, anti-tank barriers, bunkers, pre-positioned ammunition. NATO has increased its rapid reaction forces, not enough to stop an invasion alone, but enough to buy time for the full alliance to mobilize. The Baltic states have invested heavily in territorial defense, training civilians in guerrilla warfare, making occupation impossibly costly for Russia. Cyber defenses are being hardened, power grids secured, communication networks protected, removing Russia's ability to digitally paralyze the region before attacking. Here's the sobering truth. Russia could still execute this invasion. The military capability exists, but the consequences are now too severe. Those NATO troops in the Baltics aren't there to win a war. They're there to guarantee that any Russian attack means immediate war with the entire alliance. It's called deterrence by presence. Make the cost of aggression so catastrophic that even contemplating it becomes irrational. The 60-hour scenario assumes NATO is caught off guard with minimal presence. That assumption no longer holds. The tripwire is set. But deterrence only works if it's credible, if Russia believes NATO will actually fight. That's why the alliance must remain united and committed. The moment Putin senses weakness or division, the calculations change. Ukraine showed us Russia will gamble when they think the West won't respond. Every NATO exercise in the Baltics sends a message. Every rotation of troops, every piece of equipment prepositioned. We're here, we're ready, try us. The Baltic scenario isn't just about three small countries. It's about whether international borders matter, whether might makes right, whether aggression pays. If Russia successfully seized the Baltics, what stops them from eyeing Poland next? Moldova, Finland? Where does the appetite for expansion end? This is why the United States maintains its commitment despite being an ocean away. Because collective security prevents wars, and preventing wars saves American lives. The real question isn't whether Russia could conquer the Baltics in 60 hours. It's whether they dare try knowing the cost. And right now, thanks to NATO's enhanced presence, that cost is World War III. A price even Putin won't pay for Tallinn. The maps and war games are real, the threat is real, but so is the deterrence, and that's what keeps the peace in the most dangerous corridor in Europe. 60 hours to occupation, or 60 years of continued freedom. The difference is NATO resolve, and 7,000 troops standing in the gap. This is the war that won't happen, because everyone knows exactly how it would end. Not in 60 hours, but in nuclear annihilation. Sleep well tonight, but remember there are soldiers on the Suwalki Gap who can't, because they're the reason you can. The Baltic states remain free, not because Russia can't invade, but because the cost of trying just became unthinkable. And that's how you stop a 60-hour blitzkrieg. You make it clear that hour one means the end of everything, for everyone. If you found this analysis valuable, hit that subscribe button. Next week, we're covering North Korea's invasion scenario, and why Seoul wouldn't fall in 48 hours like everyone thinks. Thanks for watching. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and remember, peace through strength isn't just a slogan, it's the only thing standing between us and catastrophe.